Chris, good afternoon. Let me just open by saying you guys are doing a terrific job out there, and it's a real treat to work for you.
Well, thank you. Thanks. I'm glad you were able to set up the cameras and the infrastructure and everything that allows us to do what we're doing.
Okay, There we go. You still got me?
Yep. Let me put the video on the broadcast quick. All right, we have you live on the internet.
Okay, I know we set this up to talk about the pairings technology. I'm certainly not going to get into a lot of detail on that. There are links on the live coverage page as distinct from the live streaming page. That's live.wgvc.com if anyone wants to look at the pairings in detail, and another page on firsts and seconds, a related topic that we actually get more questions on, having to do with why am I not drawing for first or second in the final round. And that's actually a more involved topic than you would think. And maybe I would suggest anyone who's interested should go and look up those links and read the documents. And we can talk around theirs, because those are not really well suited to an online discussion. But are there any other questions or topics people wanted to kick around that you wanted to raise before I talk about the pairings?
Maybe we could briefly describe how the camera setup's working. I've been broadcasting some of the board cam out to people, and I also have access to 2 rack cams that are allowing me to give the racks out. So how is that actually set up for the players playing?
Well, I think it would be good at some point, I think, if we could get some kind of a stream of what the setup looks like, just from to give you an outside the box picture. We've got we have 3 Chromebooks, each with a fairly low-tech webcam attached. The webcams I ran out to Home Depot between the second early bird and I went out to Home Depot on the break in the first early bird and jury-rigged a system that involved screwing some wood to the underside of the table so that I could mount the webcams. The webcams are located approximately at each player's solar plexus and point at the racks, and an overhead camera points downward on the board. I am pleasantly surprised at how stable the whole setup has been, considering that it was never put together before today. The overhead crossbar is literally balanced on a pair of camera tripods, one mine and one Kieran's, and there's about 100 Scrabble players milling around the whole setup. So we're doing pretty darn good, I think. I also would, I think I need to give credit to NASPA, who is actually the owner of the Chromebooks. We have an arrangement where I configured them as word judges, because you can't actually install Ziziva on them without converting them to a developer mode and undergoing a somewhat complicated process that Dallas Johnson introduced me to in exchange for my work configuring those devices and making them available at major NASPA events. The executive committee lets me carry them around and use them for my own purposes, which I think works out well for everyone, because I end up developing new things to do with them.
That's very cool. The way the rack cameras are set up reminds me a lot of how the cameras for poker events are set up, where there's just a tiny camera that the players don't even notice showing what's going on, and the angle that they're mounted is is really good because I actually get a clear shot of the person's opponent as well, and so I'm able to give a bit of detail on the stream about somebody's facial expression or what they might be doing or thinking across the board.
Yeah, it doesn't look nearly as slapdash as I expected it would come off while I was screwing the thing together on the break between two early bird sessions.
Yeah. So yeah, and let's talk a bit about the pairings for this event then. You've developed your own kind of pairings system for events or portions of events called performance pairings. How roughly for a layman how would that work, and how is that being applied in this event?
Well, what we do is first of all, this is for Collins, TWL-A, and TWL-B. We have a standard 3 initial rounds format where the division is broken up into quadrants, and then round robin groups are formed with 1 player from each of the 4 quadrants. After that, we do straight Swiss pairings, and we do that until it's no longer possible to form reasonable Swiss groups with no repeats. And the rule of thumb that I use in that regard is you should never use Swiss pairings and allow repeats. If you can't form reasonable Swiss groups with no repeats, you should be using some other pairing method. After that, what we try to do is, the first thing we actually do with performance pairings is we divide the division into groups of first place contenders, money contenders, and non-contenders. And let's just consider the first place contenders. We form a judgment as to who is in contention for first place, who is the lowest ranked player in contention for first place, and that forms the group of first place contenders. And what we try to do is we try to pair players in that group who have not played before. And that's really the key step. And that realizing that that's what was needed was a bit of a breakthrough, because what I had been hearing in early days was top players don't care about repeats, and that's not really true. Top players don't mind playing repeats, but if there are opponents in a contenders group that they haven't been matched with previously, they want to have a shot at that person. So say your first place contenders are 8 players and the game spread between the top and the bottom is not that great, and the 8th place player could catch up to the first place player but hasn't been matched with him in the past, then that player deserves a shot, as we say. So the system would try and pair players like that as long as he has a reasonable chance of catching up. So as I said, I'm not sure all the technical details come across well enough in a video chat. I wanted to say the way I got to this algorithm was I tried to use some of the standard tools like Swiss and factor pair, which Jason Keller prefers, at an Albany event a few years ago. And as a lot of directors know, there are many players who have strong opinions about pairings and are not shy about expressing those opinions. The problem is that you've directed a couple of tournaments, right?
Yep.
The problem is that because those elite players are not really well equipped to express in algorithmic terms what they think the pairings are, the directors like and developers, software developers like myself, who need to have things spelled out in a step-by-step fashion in order to implement a computer program, essentially think the players are nuts. But I have come to understand that there really is a well-established, there's certain well-understood principles, and that most of the top players actually will agree on what the correct pairings are. So the trick was, how do we capture that intuitive understanding that a lot of players have and turn it into an algorithm, or at least something that an operator can implement? And coming out of one of these Albany tournaments, I had, because I drive up from Virginia, on this one occasion, I picked up Marlon Hill on the way up and was going to drop him off on the way home. And he was fairly dissatisfied with the way I'd paired the Owl Division A. And since we were in a car for about 4 or 5 hours heading back to Baltimore, I had a really unique opportunity to get him to explain to me specifically how he thought I ought to do this, and get him to explain in terms that I could then turn around and implement. And the discussion would get to places like, I would say, Marlon, okay, so under these circumstances, would I pair players with repeats? And he'd answer, no, unless it made sense. And then I would, of course, say, well, all right, let's rewind the discussion, because I can't tell the computer to do what makes sense. I need to know what makes sense, and then I need to express it mathematically. And that's where I got to where we are today. So Marlon deserves a lot of the credit for that. The algorithm, as it's described on the media.wgvc wiki pages that are linked from the live event page. I know you've looked them over, other experts have, and have pretty much nodded up and down that yes, this is what we were getting at. The problem is that it is difficult to program that algorithm precisely, and it involves a lot of judgment calls, and the software itself is fairly complex to operate. So it's by no means an exact science, but we get it right most of the time, I think. And when we get called out on errors, which usually involve, at this point, pairing players against the top spot who don't really have a chance to catch up. But very often when those are pointed out to us, we see, yes, that's right, we probably shouldn't have treated that player as if he was a contender. So it's a fascinating learning process. It's also something, of course, that has to happen under a lot of time pressure, along with all the other challenges of keeping an event like this running. But I think it adds to the sense of excitement, and we try to approach it in that spirit.
Yeah, that's interesting, and it's really good that we have directors who are putting a lot of thought into pairings and really going the extra mile to try and make sure that things get done right. Because players generally have an intuitive sense of how things ought to be paired, and a lot of times directors will do what's easy rather than taking the extra steps to figure out how to get the computers to spit out what's right. And so I think it's really important work that you've done in that regard.
Well, I hope it gets us incrementally closer to better pairings rather than causing the whole thing to fall apart completely. But I do think it's a step forward.
Yeah, and certainly.
Okay, so it's 3:04 now. I did wanted to get one more plug in and let you know if I think it's permissible on this channel to say WGVC is screening applicants for positions in software engineering, systems administration, and infrastructure architecture. Inquiries or resumes can be directed to jobs@wgvc.com.
All right. Hopefully we have some viewers out there, either live or will watch the archive, who might be interested in getting in touch.
Okay. Thanks very much for the opportunity to chat. Thanks again for your great work. Everyone's having a blast here, and I think Jennifer said she was going to be a little late showing up, so we may have to defer her chat. I'll go and round up our next live streaming victims.
All right, great. We'll be in touch.
Thanks, Chris.
Yep, thank
Goodbye.
you. All right, and that is tournament director and technical wizard Vince Castellano giving us a little rundown of the technical setup that's allowing us to bring you this streaming live, and also a little overview of pairings and the efforts that directors go through in order to ensure that the rounds and the event is paired as fairly and accurately as possible. It's actually a fairly involved mathematical undertaking to get pairings set up correctly. And it is one that, as Vince said, often needs to be done on the fly with a crowd of players around the table waiting to know who they're playing and why they're playing this person versus that person. And, it can be very stressful directing, especially a very large event in the heat of the moment when everything is kind of happening all at once. So I have a request from the chat. Is it possible to show the unplayed tiles? Maybe. I'll work on that a little bit right now and see if there's a way I can squeeze this into the display. Right now we are also waiting on the games are going to start in about 7 or 8 minutes. We have an owl game coming up to start. It is going to be Jackson Smiley and Kenneth Rubin playing. Right now in the owl division, we have Carl Higbee on top, a game ahead of the field at 10-4, with Joey Malik, Joey Krafchick, Conrad at 9-5. Joe Edley is 8-6 in the last money spot. We'll be showing you Jackson Smiley, who is 8-8, and Kenneth Rubin, who is Jackson's 8-6. Kenneth is 7-7. So they are still with 8 games to play. They are all still very much in contention in the TWL division. As Vince said, we'll be hopefully talking to Jennifer Lee a bit later. She's out at lunch right now with her cohorts, and so hopefully we'll get a chance to chat with her about her round 13 game with Lisa Brown that we showed on this commentary, and also about her fantastic tournament in the way that it is unfolded so far. We will be returning with you in a couple minutes. Right now, I will try to find a way to get the remaining tiles on the screen as the players play, and we'll be back with round 15 from Albany in a few moments. So please bear with us, and the stream will resume shortly. Okay, we're back and we're about ready to start with the with our next game. We have Kenneth Rubin and Jackson Smiley are going to be playing a TWL game here in round 15 from Albany, New York. The players are not yet seated at the board, but the tiles have been squared. And we are just about to get underway. There's some announcements going on out in Albany. And I see now a pair of hands clearing the tiles off the board. So we will be beginning quite shortly. Kenneth Rubin from the chat. Our game is going to be Jackson Smiley and Kenneth Rubin from the TWLA division. For those of you just joining us, just joining the broadcast as games begin, this is Chris Leip and Randy Goldberg commentating. We are joining the tournament from Albany, New York. The annual New Year's Eve event from Albany, New York. It is currently round 15, about to begin. And the tiles are in a rumpled sack on the table.
Hopefully it's the tile bag.
Yes, that rumpled sack I refer to is in fact the tile bag.
Okay.
All right, it's looking like we have all of our technology set up. We have our camera, board, and rack cams all set and ready to go. And our players are approaching the table. Directors have finished announcing things. And so we will be beginning quite shortly. And Kenneth will be starting the game, and we'll be starting shortly. I see both players are seated at the table. One of the players is making faces at the rack camera, so that's always a good sign.